are flat. So many workers have trouble making rent every month without crippling stress, or they turn to predatory loans. And the dream of home ownership is increasingly out of reach and with increasing bigger racial divides. None of this started with COVID-19. The affordable housing crisis is the product of decades of conscious policy decisions by both government and corporations. This pandemic has exposed what millions of families in this country already knew, that too many people are struggling to get by. Before the United States had our first case of COVID-19, before that, a quarter of all renters in this country were already paying more than half their income for housing. The Black home ownership rate was nearly as low as it was in 1968, when housing discrimination was legal, and when our colleague Senator Romney's father was nominated Secretary of HUD. HUD should play an essential role in fixing that and expanding opportunity for every zip code and allowing more families to have the peace of mind, the economic security of a safe home they can afford. Congresswoman Fudge will work to help protect our kids from lead poisoning, still a problem in Cleveland and in Appalachia, Ohio, to restore the promise of fair housing, to give communities the help and resources they need. All of this is a tall order. It's one she's poised to meet. She brings to the job the unique and critical experiences of serving as a mayor for the kind of community that is either overlooked or outright preyed upon by Wall Street and big investors. We can't write off entire swaths of the country, whether it's a coal town or an historic industrial city, whether it's farm country or whether it's an urban neighborhood. This champion of Cleveland understands that. The Council of Economic Advisors will also play an integral role both in helping our economy recover and in building a better system out of this pandemic. Dr. Rouse is exactly whom we need at the helm. If confirmed, she will help direct our nation's economic policy to put Americans back to work, fighting for better jobs with higher wages. Millions of Americans are still out of work. Those job losses have disproportionately fallen on low-income workers, Black and brown workers, and women. At the same time, essential workers are risking their health to go to work. Corporations still refuse to pay so many of them a living wage. It's all part of the corporate business model that treats American workers as expendable instead of essential, as we call them, to this country's success. For decades, workers' wages have remained stagnant while CEO pay has skyrocketed. Building back better means taking on that system and creating an economy with a growing, thriving middle class. It won't be the first time Dr. Rouse has helped us weather a crisis. She served on the Council of Economic Advisors a dozen years ago during the Great Recession. Dr. Rouse has spent her career focusing on workers, ensuring this economy works for everyone. Her experience and leadership will guide this administration and Congress in formulating the policies that help revive our economy so that it works for all Americans. And Dr. Rouse and Congresswoman Fudge will look at how we can protect families from climate change while seizing opportunities to create new jobs, to advance environmental justice, to grow new industries. Making our homes and communities more energy efficient isn't just necessary for our future. It's the kind of investment that will put people back to work at jobs that can't be outsourced. We face great challenges. These are extraordinary times. I look forward to hearing how each of you will help chart the course out of this pandemic and build a brighter future in the years ahead. Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to submit a number of letters for the record in support of these two nominees.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So at this time, our colleagues from Ohio and New Jersey have indicated they'd like to introduce the nominees from their home states. Senator Brown, as the senior senator from Ohio, did you have anything you wanted to add by way of introduction to Congresswoman? Yeah,
just a couple of words, and I will turn it to my colleague, Senator Portman, for sure. And I've said much about Marcia already. I mentioned her mother here, and she's calling in. She's with us from our great community college, I believe the downtown campus, although I don't know which campus she's on of Tri-C. She's a proud daughter of Ohio. She was born in Cleveland. She grew up in our state. She graduated from the Ohio State University in Cleveland Marshall College of Law, a long and distinguished career in public service. She was in the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, Chief of Staff to the trailblazing our friend Stephanie Tubbs-Jones, mayor of Warrensville Heights. I remember still the long meeting I had in her office back in, I believe, 2005. She served as national president of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Senator Portman and I have been to a number of sorority of Delta reunions with the Redcoats in the basement of Rayburn. Thank you for that. She's been a leader in Congress as past chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. We know her outspokenness on civil rights, on women's rights, on human rights. She saw up close how lenders preyed on families. Everyone in this committee has heard me talk about my zip code, 44105, more foreclosures there in the first half of 2007 than anywhere in the country. She was serving as mayor then, less than probably 7 or 8 miles from there in Warrensville Heights. She represents my zip code and those communities in the Congress now. She's dedicated her career fighting for these families and the communities they live in. I'm excited to work with her as the future chair of the Banking Housing Committee on housing issues. My pleasure to introduce Marcia Fudge and turn it to my friend, Senator Portman.
Senator Portman, you're recognized to make your comments.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Toomey and Chairman-to-be Brown, and Senator Crapo and others who might be here from the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce a friend of mine. Before I do, I want to tell her that I think it's great she's at an amazing community college, Tri-C. I hope Dr. Johnson is taking good care of you. And I understand that Mrs. Marion Safford is with you, who is a distinguished public servant in her own way, although not in elected office, and happens to be 89-year-old a mother of yours. Is that correct? Yeah, well, congratulations to you and to your family for this nomination. And I'm here just to say that I'm proud that you're choosing to step up. You're a friend of mine. We've worked together. You do have a distinguished career, and you have worked on housing policy issues throughout your entire public policy career. You graduated from Ohio State, earned a law degree from Cleveland State. You were a Cuyahoga County prosecutor, assistant prosecutor. You were the first African-American and first female mayor of Warrensville Heights. And there you worked on housing issues. I'm told that affordable housing was one of your policy objectives there, and you were successful in expanding that. Since being elected to the House of Representatives in 2008, succeeding another friend of mine who was, very successful member of Congress who was able to work on both sides of the aisle, Stephanie Tubbs Jones. You have gone on to serve the people of Cleveland in the 11th District with a substantial and impressive work ethic, as I have seen, certainly compassion for your constituents, many of whom live in communities where there's not good access to housing or jobs, and where poverty is an issue. My experience and that of respected members of the Cleveland community who I know well is that you have worked collaboratively to tackle these challenges, working across party lines, including even with your Republican senator now and again, and with the business community to help your constituents. Of course, you were also chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and they made you chair because they recognize your leadership capabilities. In our time in Congress together, we've worked on a number of things that are bicameral, bipartisan, including teaming up to increase college access for low-income students through our Go to High School, Go to College Act, which incentivizes students to earn college credits in high school through the Pell Grant program. In 2014, after a HUD rule that I thought was a bureaucratic rule that didn't make much sense, cut off some Cleveland area families from critical housing and social services, your office and my office, and you and I worked together to ensure that HUD worked with Cuyahoga County and with City Mission, in particular in Cleveland, so that struggling residents continue to have access to those vital services. And we were successful in working with HUD on that. So I know you've had experiences working with the HUD bureaucracy. During this healthcare and economic crisis, she's continued to be a leader in fighting for housing security by co-sponsoring amendments to the CARES Act due to missed rent or mortgage payments. Just as important as her experience is, in my view, is who she is as a person. And I don't always agree with Marcia on policy. She certainly doesn't always agree with me, but I can speak to her integrity, her commitment to justice, and the strength of her character. I think she's got a public servant's heart. I think she's in it for the right reasons. And again, I'm encouraged that she's willing to step up to take on this new responsibility, which is not always easy in these times. As head of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, she will have an important job of leading efforts to ensure affordable, quality housing is within reach of all Americans. This is something we all hope for. It's critical as our nation continues to face a housing crisis compounded by the healthcare and economic crises caused by COVID-19. I noticed this morning there was a new report on economic growth. Fourth quarter growth was substantial, over 4%. That doesn't mean that housing became any more affordable. In a way, I think as we begin to come out of this pandemic, we're going to get back as we start to grow the economy again, which all of us hope for, and I believe will happen, into the same issue we have been in, which is a lack of affordable housing in my state of Ohio and around the country. So I know Representative Fudge shares that concern and will be focused on that. I know she also shares this committee's commitment to addressing the eviction crisis we've got right now, and how do you deal with that in the middle of a pandemic? It's a tough issue, you know, you want to be sure that landlords, particularly our small landlords around the state of Ohio and elsewhere, aren't left without the resources they need to be able to be successful. But also, we need to be sure we're dealing with the reality of people not being able to pay rent in some cases, and avoiding those evictions, which cause so much pain and inefficiency in our system. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me the privilege of introducing Representative Fudge. I look forward to hearing from her this morning, and then the opportunity to vote for her on the United States Senate floor.
Thank you, Senator Portman. Senator Menendez, you are recognized to introduce Dean Rouse.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as a senior member of the committee, I look forward to working with you and incoming Chairman Brown on an important set of agendas that I know the committee will be pursuing. And today, it's a sincere honor to introduce Dr. Cecilia Rouse as President Biden's nominee for the chair of the Presidential Council of Economic Advisors. Now, this isn't the first time I've introduced Dr. Rouse to this committee. I had the same honor back in 2009 when President Obama nominated her to the Council of Economic Advisors during the height of the Great Recession. And as a member of the council, Dr. Rouse helped devise strategies to strengthen our labor market and steer our country out of what at the time was known and we realized was the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Now she is once again being called on by a president to serve our nation in an hour of even greater peril and uncertainty, this time as chair. When she is confirmed, Dr. Rouse will be the first African-American woman to chair the President's Council on Economic Advisors. Yet aside from the historic nature of her nomination, Dr. Rouse's experience in both the Obama and Clinton administrations, as well as her academic expertise, make her eminently qualified for this role. As you pointed out, she currently serves as the Dean of the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University, one of New Jersey's most prestigious and nationally renowned institutions. Her primary research and teaching interests are in labor economics, with a particular focus on the economics of education. Indeed, Dr. Rouse has often said that she first became interested in economics as a tool to expand opportunity and create positive social change. She has studied the economic benefits of community college attendance, the effect of financial aid on college matriculation, the impact of student loan debt on graduates entering the job market. She's also a strong advocate for reducing racial wealth inequality, an important priority as we grapple with a pandemic that has disproportionately devastated minority communities. Dr. Rouse is also a senior editor of The Future of Children and has served as an editor of the Journal of Labor Economics. Additionally, she is the founding director of the Princeton University Education Research Section and former director of the Industrial Relations Section. I believe Dr. Rouse has the right experience and insight to help chart a path for our country out of this crisis and towards a brighter, more equitable, and more prosperous future for all Americans. And I certainly will be urging my colleagues both on the committee and in the Senate to support her swift confirmation as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, and I look forward to working with her to get our economy back on track and bring much needed change and equity to our nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Senator Booker, you are recognized to introduce Dean Rouse.
Chairman, I'm grateful for you and Senator Brown as well for your leadership and for allowing me these moments of introductions for Dr. Rouse. If I may tread upon your grace, it is very hard for me to see Marcia Fudge sitting before you without putting on the record just a touch of truth about her. I've been in the Senate for 7 years, and it is not an overstatement to say that one of my most invaluable colleagues and friends in that 7 years is Marcia Fudge. She is an extraordinary woman who has a deep kindness at her soul. And many of us who know her, she has been a big sister. She has been a mentor, and that is most certainly true in my life. And I know she, like me, was a former mayor. As a mayor, you get the skill of finding ways to bring people together, to create common ground. I saw those skills on display when she was the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, which is a very diverse group, but also her ability from that position to work across the aisle, find common ground, and get things done. And so I know this committee will deal a lot with her should she be confirmed. And I think, as was said by Senator Portman, you will find in her a goodness, a decency, and God willing, a friendship that I hope this committee on both sides of the aisle recognizes that it could be for you as it has been for me, one of the most valuable relationships I have. The only warning I'll give about her is don't try to serve her vegan food like I did. It's the only time I've seen her have harsh language to me. And now I'd like to have the honor of just saying quickly some remarks about Dr. Rouse, who is President Biden's nominee for the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. What a privilege it is to be able to affirm what has already been said by my senior Senator Menendez. If confirmed, Dr. Rouse will be tasked with an enormous challenge of helping to craft and guide our nation's economic policy at a time of unprecedented economic crisis. Across the country, this committee knows tens of millions of Americans have lost their jobs. Millions of our countrymen and women in this wealthy nation have been pushed into poverty, food insecurity, with women especially suffering, and challenges being seen amongst people of color and women of color in particular. The impact of this economic crisis has been savage and unequal, and has compounded a lot of the realities that were already grievous in our country. Systemic inequality, historic disinvestment in Black and brown communities like the one I live in. The Washington Post reported it most succinctly, and they said that the COVID-19 recession is the most unequal in modern U.S. history. The economic crisis and the resultant attendant health crisis created by this pandemic have made clear how interconnected the challenges are that we face. And these crises have also made clear how necessary it is for bold action and bold leadership. We must have people with the kind of competency, qualifications, and commitment that Dr. Rouse has. If confirmed, I strongly believe that Dr. Rouse will offer the kind of leadership, vision, and action needed to enact an economic agenda that really prioritizes working families, that rebuilds our economy in an inclusive way, and addresses systemic barriers that have driven what is a real threat to our society as we know it, which is the wealth and economic inequalities that have grown worse over my lifetime. I don't just say this because Senator Menendez, as he noted, that Dr. Rouse is a proud New Jerseyan, dean of the School of Public and International Affairs to Princeton University. But Dr. Rouse is just renowned in her field. She is a well-known and celebrated labor economist, a leader in academia and in the study of the economic impact of diversity and inclusion, and knowing that these are elements that are not nice to talk about, but actually add to the economic strength of organizations in our country, public and private alike. She's a public servant who has served as a member of the Council of Economic Advisors in the Obama-Biden administration and on the National Economic Council in the Clinton administration as special assistant to President Clinton. If confirmed, Dr. Rouse will serve as the first African-American and fourth woman to lead the Council of Economic Advisors since its establishment 74 years ago. If the committee moves her forward, it will be historic in that sense. She will not just make history if confirmed, though. I am confident she will help to shape a future that is more resonant with our common values as a people, that she will be a force to making our nation bend the arc of that moral universe more towards liberty and justice for all. I urge my colleagues to swiftly confirm Dr. Rouse's nomination. Thank you for this time.
Thank you, Senator Booker. I will now swear in the nominees. Because of the remote format of today's hearing, I will swear in each nominee individually. Congresswoman Fudge, will you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Do you agree to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Senate? Congresswoman Fudge, can you hear me? Having a little trouble with your audio. Okay, why don't we work on that technical challenge here, and I will move on and ask Dr. Rouse if you will please rise and raise your right hand. Dr. Rouse, do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And do you agree to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Senate?
I do.
You may sit down. Congresswoman Fudge, are you able to hear me? We do not. We cannot hear your audio. Okay, so I was going to recognize you first, Congresswoman Fudge, but because we have this technical difficulty, I'm going to go to Dr. Rouse for her opening statement, and then hopefully we'll have gotten the problem solved in the meantime, but we're not able to hear you.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Now I can hear you, yes. I'm sorry to impose on you again, but we couldn't hear your response to the second question in the oath. So if you don't mind, please standing, raise your right hand again. And the question is, do you agree to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Senate?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. You may sit down. Each of your written statements will be made a part of the record in their entirety. Congresswoman Fudge, please proceed with your statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If I may, Mr. Chairman, may I introduce my family that is with me today?
Absolutely, you may.
Thank you. You've heard much about my mother today, but I'm going to have her wave at you if they can see her. And this is the rest of all of my families here, my aunts, my stepfather, all of my cousins, and dear friends. So I just wanted you to be aware that we are all here together. I'm very, very close to my family, and I'm pleased that they could be with me today. And to my senators, thank you for your kind words and certainly for your friendship. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, I thank President Biden for nominating me to serve as the 18th Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and will do everything possible to ensure that every American has a roof over their head. The housing issues our nation faces are real, varied, and touch all of us. I'm a strong believer in the department's programs and its mission, especially with regard to serving those who face the greatest need. Senators, I have dedicated my entire life to public service and to working to help low-income families, seniors, and communities. I believe I am up to the challenge that is before me. As mayor of Warrensville Heights, Ohio, I saw firsthand the need for economic development and affordable housing. We improved the city's tax base and expanded affordable housing opportunities. As a member of Congress, I tackled the unique challenges of my district, working with my delegation and across the aisle. Our housing issues do not fit into a cookie-cutter mold, and I know that the same is true in each of your states. We need policies and programs that can adapt to meet your unique housing challenges, and I would very much like to work with each of you to find the right answers for your states. It bears mentioning, particularly in this moment of crisis, that HUD, perhaps more than any other department, exists to serve the most vulnerable people in America. That mandate matters a great deal to me. It is consistent with my own values, and it is precisely what has always motivated me to service. It is estimated that on any given night in 2019, more than 500,000 people experienced homelessness in America. That's a devastating statistic. Even before you consider the reality of what COVID-19 has done to exacerbate this crisis. According to one study, 21 million Americans currently pay more than 30% of their income on housing because of lost income and unemployment due to COVID-19. 1 in 5 renters and 1 in 10 homeowners with a mortgage are behind in their housing payments. Native housing is also in crisis, with far too many families living in substandard and overcrowded housing conditions on reservations. Although Congress provided $25 billion in rental assistance and the CDC extended the eviction moratorium, this is not enough at a time when tens of millions of Americans are behind on rent. Almost 3 million homeowners are currently in forbearance, and another 800,000 borrowers are delinquent. Much like COVID-19, the housing crisis isn't isolated by geography. It is the daily reality for tens of millions of our fellow Americans, people in blue states and red states, in cities and small towns. My first priority as secretary would be to alleviate that crisis and get people the support they need to come back from the edge. We need to expand resources for HUD's programs to people who are eligible. Today, according to a 2017 study, only 1 out of 5 eligible households receive housing assistance. We need to deliver on the administration's commitments on improving the quality, safety, and accessibility of affordable housing and building 1.5 million new affordable homes. We need to make the dream of home ownership a reality and the security and wealth creation that comes with it. It needs to be a reality for all Americans. That will require us to end discriminatory practices in the housing market and ensure that our fair housing rules are doing what they are intended to do, opening the door for families, especially families of color, who have been systematically kept out in the cold across generations to buy homes and punch their ticket to the middle class. There are so many issues we need to come together to address. Everything from bringing capital back to disinvested communities, to increasing energy efficiency in housing, to dealing with the dangers of lead-based paint, to taking on our crisis of homelessness with compassion and resolve. These are only some of the challenges, and I know that many of you have additional priorities as well. These problems are urgent, but they are not beyond our capacity to solve. The only way we will meet them is by working together. And to that end, I pledge this. If I have the honor of being confirmed, I will be accessible to you, I will listen to you, and I will be a partner to you to solve the housing challenges our constituents are facing back home. I expect you to hold me accountable. I welcome the accountability, and I will always strive to be a transparent and good faith partner as we work together to do the vitally important work we're all here to do, helping families in need. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Fudge. Dean Rouse, please proceed.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator Menendez and Senator Booker, for the generous introductions. Chair Toomey, incoming Chairman Brown, and members of the committee, it is an honor to appear before you today. The last time I was before this committee was in 2009 for my confirmation hearing to become a member of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. I was accompanied by many members of my family. This is a very different time, and while they're not here today, they are with me in spirit. I thank them for the love and support they've provided in helping me on the path that has led me before you today. That path began in the early 1980s, during what was, at the time, one of the worst spikes in unemployment our country had experienced since the 1930s. I was a freshman in college taking my first economics class. Okay, I was there because my wise mother told me to take an econ class. But what really piqued my interest was unemployment, when I could see how classroom material could be applied to the world outside and the millions who were experiencing in real time the effects of a struggling economy. I was drawn to the discipline because I wanted to know why this was happening. Why had jobs disappeared and what could be done to bring them back? I focused my work on the labor market and in particular on the impact of education on people's job prospects, ways to tear down barriers to job growth, and policies to make it possible for more people to achieve long-lasting economic security. Since then, I've had the honor of working on these important issues in academia and the public sector. Today, our country is living through the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Millions of families have had their lives turned upside down. The economic security they've worked so hard to build eroded almost overnight by the economic impact of the pandemic. Far too many have slipped through our frayed safety net into hardship and hopelessness. And structural inequities that have always existed within our economy have not just been exposed, but exacerbated, their impact more devastating than ever before. We must take action to shepherd our nation's economy back into solid footing. But as deeply distressing as this pandemic and economic fallout have been, it is also an opportunity to rebuild the economy better than it was before, making it work for everyone by increasing the availability of fulfilling jobs and leaving no one vulnerable to falling through the cracks. President Biden and Vice President Harris have made these the core values of their Build Back Better agenda. If confirmed, my job will be to provide them with objective economic guidance, recommendations rooted in fact and evidence to help them achieve those important goals. As important as it is for the CEA to interpret and translate data and academic research, it is also vital that we utilize the right data. Too often, economists focus on average outcomes instead of examining a range of outcomes. As a result, our analyses tell us about average economic growth and the middle of the distribution, but as our economy grows more and more unequal, that analysis fails to capture the experience of the many people who are left behind, particularly people of color. Therefore, one of my priorities as chair will be to try to understand how policies will impact all in our country as we strive to ensure the economy works for everyone. Equally important is having analysis conducted by economists who specialize in a variety of fields. If confirmed, I will staff the CEA with a well-rounded team ready to address the incredible breadth of challenges we face. To close, I am honored to be nominated for this position. It would allow me to work on issues close to my heart and so critical in this current crisis. A good paying, fulfilling job has always been the key to building economic security. Today, we are seeing the immense pain caused when our economy fails to fulfill that promise. But I believe there is much we can do to strengthen the position of everyone across this incredible country of ours. If confirmed, I will work closely with you on these important priorities. I will do so regardless of your party affiliation, your approach to various policies, or your opinion of the administration's efforts. Economists are trained to gather and analyze information and consider innovative perspectives. That is how I will approach this job, and my door will always be open. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Rouse. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning and remind my colleagues that we have a lot of members on this committee, and we really need to try to stick to this clock. Congresswoman Fudge, to go back to your quote from September of 2020, you referred to Republicans who wanted to fill Justice Ginsburg's seat, which is to say every single Republican senator, as having no decency, no honor, no integrity, and as a disgrace to the nation. Those are quotes. Do you stand by that statement?
Let me first say, Senator, that I think there are more to those quotes, but let me just suggest that I have always been able to work across the aisle. I have a reputation that shows my bipartisanship. Yes, I do listen to my constituents, and sometimes I am a little passionate about things. Is my tone pitch perfect all the time? It is not. But I do know this, that I have the ability and the capacity to work with Republicans and I intend to do just that, and that is my commitment to you.
In June of last year, while discussing Republican policing reform efforts, you said in part that if Republicans, quote, want to save face and let this country know that they care even a little bit about people of color, which I don't believe they do, but if they want to try, I want to listen. Do you really believe that Republicans don't care even a little bit about people of color?
I think the latter part of my statement is my true feeling. If they do, I do want to listen. I listen. I have always listened. I am one of the most bipartisan members in the House of Representatives. And I think that if you would check that, my record would reflect that.
Let me ask you about the issue of deploying the APA and complying with it. Congresswoman Fudge, President Biden, as you probably know, has directed the HUD Secretary to examine the effects of the HUD's 2020 disparate impact rule. If you're confirmed and you carry out that examination, if you conclude that revisions to the rule are in fact needed, will you comply with the APA and go through a robust notice and comment rulemaking rather than merely trying to revert automatically back to the previous rule?
That's a great question, Senator. I'm going to follow the law and follow the rules. You don't ever have to worry about that. That is my commitment to you.
So there is some flexibility within the APA, as you probably know. What I'm specifically interested in is whether you're willing to go through the notice and comment period so that you can get as much input as possible and make the most informed judgment going forward. Is that something you're willing to do?
It is something I'm certainly willing to consider, sir. Yes.
Okay. And I assume that you would ensure that any revisions that you would make would be consistent with the Supreme Court ruling in the Inclusive Communities decision?
No question about it. I, again, will support the law. But if I may, Senator?
Yeah.
I listened to your opening statement, and you were talking about unintended consequences. I kind of look at the disparate impact rule the same way. You know, we do things oftentimes not intending to be discriminatory, but our effect is discriminatory.
I understand that, and that is worthy of a whole lengthy conversation, but in the interest of keeping to my 5-minute limit, I just want to touch on another issue if I could, and that is the Mutual Mortgage Insurance Fund. Again, this is a fund that protects taxpayers from losses. If you decide to make changes, specifically any lowering of the premiums for that fund, will you commit to making sure that you do that in a collaborative fashion with members of Congress?
You have my commitment. Not only will, if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, I will talk to the staff at HUD. We will figure out what the status is right now and come back to you to have discussions about where we should go from there. You have
Thank you. Dr. Rouse, I appreciated our conversation the other day. I enjoyed the discussion. I just want to stress, well, maybe I would just ask, is it your view that when the government mandates a certain economic policy, it is often the case that there are unintended consequences and costs to policies that might also have benefits?
Well, thank you, Senator. What is important is that when the government imposes mandates, that it does so completely understanding the potential benefits of such mandates as well as the costs, and to undertake those mandates where the benefits would outweigh the costs. So if there's lunch, most important thing is to understand both costs and benefits.
Great, thank you. Senator Brown.
First of all, I think the fact that Senator Portman called Congresswoman Fudge and offered to co-introduce him or introduce him tells you a lot about her bipartisan work. And we all are outspoken about our views. Marcia is, I am, Pat Toomey is, Rob Portman is, and I've just always found Congresswoman Fudge to work with me, to work with most of our House delegation in Ohio. Overwhelmingly is Republican, and she works with them, and she represents her constituents with fervor and passion through all of that. Let me start with Congresswoman Fudge. As you know, before this pandemic, as you point out, Dr. Rouse pointed out in both your testimonies, families in our country were struggling to make rent prior to the pandemic. There were nearly 1 million evictions every year prior to this. We know the pandemic, as you both said, have pushed so many millions of families over the edge. That's one of the reasons I'm so proud of what we did with the CARES Act, especially if we had kept it going, because we kept 12 million people out of poverty. Congressman Fudge, emergency funds Congress provided in December were just a down payment. As President Biden and many of us in Congress have said, we have to do more to prevent waves of foreclosures and evictions, to stop millions of people from taking a permanent financial hit because of the crisis. Just give us a short version of what you will do through HUD to ensure that families don't lose their homes.
Thank you so much, Senator. One of the things we must do is stabilize the market. We cannot afford to have millions of people evicted from their homes or their apartments, because the problem then just gets worse. It doesn't get better. And I understand that there are some who believe that we are doing more than we should, but I believe we are not doing enough. On any given day, we have 8 million people who need housing. So not only do we need to protect those who are currently in housing, but we need to ensure that those who are without housing get it. And so one of the things that we have to talk about is finding ways to expand our inventory of low and moderate income housing. We have to keep people in public housing who are already there. We need to expand housing choice vouchers so that we can at least start to reduce the numbers of people who are paying exorbitant amounts of money for rent. We also need to find ways to assist people who want to build low income and affordable housing. And we do that through many things. But lastly, and most importantly, we want to be sure that FHA is available for people who want to take the next step. So that may be helping with down payment assistance. It may mean reducing rents. Whatever it takes, we cannot afford to allow people in the midst of a pandemic to be put in the streets. I just believe that extraordinary times take extraordinary action, and we are in extraordinary times, Senator.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Let me ask you a quick up or down question. The past 4 years, the Trump administration, a yes or no question. The Trump administration tried to undo HUD's mission to enforce fair housing laws. You and I have talked about that a lot. Earlier this week, the president announced several executive orders and plans to begin to reverse these policies and finally work to fulfill the promises of the Fair Housing Act. My question, if confirmed, will you commit to fully enforce fair housing laws?
Yes.
Thank you. This is just, I'll close with a statement both to Dr. Rouse and to Congresswoman Fudge. Cities like Cleveland still have far too many homes that expose children to dangerous lead paint. In 2019, researchers found there were elementary schools and Marcia Fudge is in my hometown of Cleveland, where more than a third of kindergartners had elevated high levels of elevated lead levels in their blood. 5 and 6 year olds disproportionately, of course, as we know, children of color. We start them out in life with such a disadvantage. Dr. Rouse, you're a researcher who studies education and its connection to work. You know the cost, both moral and economic, that occurs when our fellow citizens are unable to achieve their full potential, especially when it starts in that young. We know how to keep kids safe from lead poisoning. We're seeing some promising steps in Cleveland and elsewhere. My colleague, Senator Reid, the most senior member of this committee, has worked on this in his appropriations role also. We just haven't had the public, collective, political will to do it. I hope that that's going to change. I look forward to working with both of you, Dr. Rouse and Congresswoman Fudge, to fully protect our kids from lead and other threats to their health. It's hard to imagine anything so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Congresswoman Fudge, as well as Dr. Rouse. Thank you for your willingness to serve our country, and I look forward to having a meaningful dialogue about some of the issues that will be very important to the nation. And frankly, Congresswoman Fudge, I have respect for you and appreciation for your willingness to serve, and I think you and I are philosophically disjointed on a number of issues, but your willingness to serve is strong. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the previous comments that you've made about the Republican Party as it relates to race. I think I can't say that your comments were taken out of context. I would simply say that I would love to have a longer conversation about how effective the Republican Party has been on meeting some of the needs of the most vulnerable people in this country, specifically minorities, over the last several years. I have certainly played a role in making sure that some of the priorities that impacts our community have been brought to the surface, to the top, and have been prioritized by the Republican Party. And just to name a few, and I'm going to get to the question that I have, highest level of funding for HBCUs in the history of this country, permanent funding for the first time in the history of the country, the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded pre-pandemic in the history of the country for African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, 60-year low for women as well. Research on rare blood diseases to include sickle cell anemia, criminal justice reform that actually frankly made up for some of the challenges of Mr. Biden, President Biden's 1994 law. Increases in labor force participation rate. I believe at 2016, the home ownership for African Americans was around 41%. Today it's around 46%, and that's even after the dip of the pandemic. Poverty at the lowest rate recorded since 1959. Aid to Black farmers that I've worked on through heirs property, focusing on heirs property as a real issue. Coming from the South, I know and understand and appreciate the value of allowing African American farmers to use heirs property in a way to obtain a farm number so that they can participate fully in the USDA. It's really important. And finally, opportunity zones that are having a positive, strong impact throughout this country. And frankly, the TCJA certainly was passed on a partisan level only, but the opportunity zone legislation is legislation that was co-sponsored by Cory Booker and House members that are Democrats and Republicans. And to that end, I hope, and my question for you is, can I count on you to take serious the opportunity to use opportunity zones as a way of meeting some of the challenging needs that we have from a housing stock around the country?
Thank you so much, Senator Scott. It's nice to see you, actually.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a pleasure. And it is my pleasure to have a conversation with you about what you have done as it relates to minority communities and communities that are hurting. It would indeed be something that I'd like to discuss with you. As it relates to opportunity zones, I will take seriously, of course, opportunity zones. Certainly, I would like to, if confirmed, to get into the office and look at how many jobs have been created, how many sustainable jobs have been created, what the cost has been. I mean, I think that you have to be driven by data, and I will absolutely take it seriously. I know it's something important to you and would be happy to have those conversations with you going forward.
Thank you. I will note that in opportunity zones, they are responsible for helping, even in Columbus, Ohio, 50 incarcerated individuals in Columbus find housing, 95 units of workforce housing, 100 new jobs in Cleveland. In my state, Hampton County, a very poor rural community, 1,500 jobs in a community that only has 5,000 jobs brought to them by opportunity zones. And that continues throughout major cities from Birmingham to Rock Hill, South Carolina, where we're using opportunity zones to really challenge the playing field for those folks who have been left out and who are desperate for housing. Speaking of being desperate for housing, about 22 million Americans live in manufactured housing throughout this country, 1 in 5 in South Carolina. The definition of manufacturing housing is no longer the trailers that people come to mind. Manufacturing housing has a diversity within its construct, and I would love to hear that you have an interest in and perhaps even a passion for making sure that we continue to prioritize manufacturing housing as one of the ways for us to lower the cost and make more homeowners, make homeownership more possible for more Americans. Have you done any homework on the manufacturing housing? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on using that to meet some of the needs that we have throughout the community.
Yes, I have. As a matter of fact, thank you, Senator, for the question. I have done research. I have actually had conversations with those who build manufactured housing. I think it's an outstanding option. The cost is about $78,000 to $100,000 a home. It is affordable. It is something we can do rapidly. I am 100% supportive of looking more into how we incorporate manufactured housing.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to welcome Congresswoman Fudge and Dr. Rouse to the hearing. Dr. Rouse, thank you for your service to Rhode Island as a member of the Board of Trustees of URI, so go Rhodey. And want to say to the Congresswoman, thank you for your great work in the Congress. We've all touched upon affordable housing, and sometimes we see it simply as a human cost, which is tremendous. But there's a definite economic cost too, which should be an incentive to build more affordable housing. In Rhode Island, for example, 90% of our homeless individuals are on Medicaid, and their cost per annum is about $14,000. That's 80% more than the overall average Medicaid recipient. So when you address the affordable housing issue, I hope you will point out consistently the economic benefits of affordable housing as well as the human cost. And any comments I'd appreciate, Congressman.
Yes, and thank you, Senator, for the conversation we've had to discuss some of the issues that I know are important to you. The economic costs are in the trillions. I mean, if you look at the data shows that it is an economic deterrent to not have people in housing. When you look at the lost jobs, the lost income, and the lost development opportunities, it is more difficult for people to get to work. So we lose so much when we don't have decent, affordable public housing. And the cost of homelessness is just skyrocketing. It was bad before we ever addressed COVID. Now what we have found out is that the cost of care for homeless people is skyrocketing as a result of COVID, because homeless people tend to be sicker. Homeless people tend to contract the disease more often. Poorer people or people who live in public housing tend to contract the disease more often. And so it is a very costly proposition, just physically as well as economically.
Well, let me thank you very much, Congresswoman, but let me associate myself also with Senator Brown's comments on lead. We have had the same problem in Rhode Island as you've had in Cleveland, because we probably have about the same age of housing. I've worked very close with Chairman Collins on the Appropriations Committee to get funding for lead. But one of the things I'd just like to point out, as you recognize very clearly, with the pandemic, more particularly low-income people are spending time crowded in a home which might have lead problems. So the problem is even more acute today because of the pandemic, and we have to apply the resources to that. I know you agree, but I just want to get that on the record.
Yes, thank you. I agree 100%.
Thank you. Again, Dr. Rouse, thank you for your help to Rhode Island. As I said before, go Rhodey. Senator Toomey and I both have a certain ties to the state, so we appreciate your help to the university. One issue I want to raise in my brief time remaining is automatic stabilizers for unemployment insurance. In Rhode Island, at the last recession, you noticed, because you were working in the administration, that some states came out first, so that the overall national picture looked pretty good, but Rhode Island and Nevada were going head-to-head every week as who would have the highest unemployment rate at about 12%. So as we go forward, I would hope you would consider automatic stabilizers so that certain parts of the country, and it's not one region perhaps, it's based on lots of factors, would not be left behind when the overall economy starts growing. In your comments, Doctor.
Thank you, Senator Reed. And yes, go Rhodey. So I think automatic stabilizers are an important tool in our toolkit as we think about how we deal with our economic slowdowns and help families and our economy recover. We already have them in terms of SNAP and Medicaid and taxes, and our so they should be part of it. I think UI is a natural place for us also to have automatic stabilizers. Obviously, incorporating the differences across the country by geography would be an important part of any design. There are challenges there, but I do think that that's an important place for us.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. Good luck. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reed. I just want to remind senators to please turn on your camera if you are present and intending to speak so that we know that you're there. And I think next up is Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Fudge, President Biden and his senior advisors have said that one of his top housing priorities is racial equity, not racial equality. In fact, earlier this week, President Biden used the phrase racial equity at a press availability, but immediately corrected himself to say racial equity. What is the difference between racial equity and racial equality?
Thank you for the question, Senator. From my own perspective, the difference is that one just means that you treat everybody the same. Sometimes the same is not equitable. You know, if you say to me that I'm going to give you $5 and you're going to give my friend $5, my $5 is not going to necessarily go as far because my friend already has a mother and father who are wealthy and they're giving them, let's do it this way. Home ownership, let's take it that way. They say, let's make everything equal, but it's not equal because even though I meet all of the qualifications to qualify for a loan, you know, I've got the right credit scores, et cetera, but I don't have down payment money because my parents can't afford to give me down payment. There is no wealth coming to me. Where most people who are not, that don't look like me, have options that I do not have. So just to say you treat us all the same is not the same. Equity means making the playing field level. Sometimes it's not level if you just say, let's just treat everybody the same.
Okay, so racial equality means treating everyone the same, correct?
Yeah, the same, though, is not always fair. That is correct.
So just to be clear, then, it sounds like racial equity means treating people differently based on their race. Is that correct?
Not based on race, but it could be based on economics. It could be based on the history of discrimination that has existed for a long time. It could be based on educational levels. It could be based on many things, not necessarily just race.
Is it ever appropriate for the government to treat people differently based on their race?
No.
Thank you. I want to return to something that came up with Senator Toomey. You had said last year, September 2020, during the debate about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's vacancy on the Supreme Court, in a floor speech, those who are bent on choosing her successor have no decency, they have no honor, they have no integrity. You later said they are a disgrace to this nation. If I recall correctly, Pat Toomey wanted to replace Justice Ginsburg on the bench. Do you believe that Pat Toomey has no decency, has no honor, has no integrity, and is a disgrace to this nation?
Sir, first off, I don't really know Senator Toomey. I'm certain that he is not. He seems like a fine man to me.
Your audio cut out there for a moment. I will say.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. I'll say for the record that I believe that Senator Toomey has decency, honor, and integrity. I want to turn to another moment last year in June 2020 and around the debate about policing reform. You said that we have them being Republicans, on the run, quite frankly. Right now, the president has Tim Scott trying to come up with a bill. And so they know they must do something, and they know they can't do it without us. So if they want to save face and let this country know that they care even a little bit about people of color, which I don't believe they do, but if they want to try, I want to listen. Congresswoman Fudge, do you believe that Tim Scott doesn't care even a little bit about people of color?
Tim Scott happens to be a friend. I support and trust Tim Scott.
Could you answer my question, please? You said that they care even a little bit about people of color, which I don't believe they do. That would be referring to Republicans, of which Tim Scott is one. Do you believe he cares even a little bit about people of color?
He is one, but he's not. I wasn't talking about all Republicans. Tim Scott clearly is a fine, upstanding senator, and I do believe he cares.
Okay, thank you, Congresswoman Fudge. I could go on. There's a long history of intemperate comments such as this. Obviously, all of us in public life sometimes say things that we hope we could take back. But if you're confirmed, you're going to be serving the needs of many, many Republicans, as well as Democrats and nonpartisan people as well. And I hope that in the future, you can serve them in a way that reflects your best moments in the Congress and not some of these comments. Thank
Well,
you.
certainly, I thank you. And I do serve people now, Republicans and Democrats, quite well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Menendez.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just make a comment. If intemperate comments or harsh comments are the standard, I presided and as the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee over an enormous number of individuals who would have never gotten through the committee, and certainly Republicans overwhelmingly voted for them. And their comments might have been seen in the same context. I understand the nature of political comments at the end of the day. And I believe from everything I have seen of Congresswoman Fudge that she will work for all people, Democrats, Republicans, independents, white, black, brown, Native Americans, and others. Let me just turn to the question of eviction and housing crisis that displaces millions of American families and further destabilizes our country. As of this month, 2.7 million homeowners are in forbearance plans. As of last month, nearly 1 in 5 adult renters were not caught up on rent. And as with any American crisis, the situation is particularly dire for minority communities. Talk about equity and those issues. As of last month, 28% of black renters, 24% of Latino renters say they would not caught up on their rent, compared to only 12% of white renters. So in previous crises, housing counseling has helped families stay in their homes. Congresswoman Fudge, do you believe providing additional funding for housing counseling would help prevent evictions and foreclosures in this crisis as well?
Thank you so much for the question, Senator. I absolutely do believe that counseling is a major part of assisting people, whether it's staying in their homes or continuing to pay their rents. We have programs that are available to people that they are not aware of, because we don't provide the resources to make them aware. So counseling should be at the top of our list, especially as we try to work our way out of this crisis.
Well, I agree with you very much. As a matter of fact, according to the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, for example, loans to home buyers that receive counseling perform better. And in 2017, 74% of housing counseling clients were people of color. That's why I hope you'll work with me in helping me pass my coronavirus housing Counseling Investment Act, something I think that would help all of our families. Under the last administration, HUD relocated key multifamily housing staff from its office in Newark to the New York regional office. As former mayors, we both understand that represents a significant challenge for the over 750 multifamily properties that exist in New Jersey. Can you commit to me that you will ensure that the Newark office has the staff it needs and that New Jersey and its interest remains a priority with HUD?
Yes, I can commit that to you, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Rouse, last week I asked Secretary Yellen about the importance of providing fiscal relief to our state and local government so they can continue to fight the pandemic and keep our essential workers on the job and off the unemployment line. She agreed that now would not be the time to withhold fiscal support from state and local governments. Do you agree with that?
Yes, Senator. I do share Janet Yellen's view, which is that our prime focus right now has to be on getting us through this pandemic, to provide aid to our households, to our businesses, especially small businesses. But also we need to ensure that our state and local governments can be providing for the firefighters, the transit workers, the first responders, and our educators as they are stepping up in ways that they would not have budgeted for last year. I would also highlight that in the Great Recession, that not providing relief to, well, we provided relief to state and local governments, but it was the job losses there that provided a drag on the recovery. And so again, to ensure that we have a swift return back to economic health, providing aid to state and local governments is part of that package.
Thank you. And finally, Congresswoman Fudge, and I appreciated the visit that we had. 8 years ago, New Jersey faced the worst natural disaster in our state's history, Superstorm Sandy, causing havoc throughout the state. And New Jersey families are now finding themselves, after having traveled the convoluted procedures, where they got some assistance from FEMA and from HUD to rebuild their lives, get back in. but now finding themselves being caught in a maze in which there is an effort to claw back some of those monies. I hope that you can work with us to provide flexibility for standing survivors in New Jersey.
Absolutely, Senator, and I appreciate your informing me and getting me up to speed on the situation. And if confirmed, it will be one of the early things that I take a look at and be happy.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Senator Rouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Fudge, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity yesterday to visit with you. I appreciated our conversation. As I discussed with you at that time, I had suspected that a number of my colleagues, before I had the opportunity to speak, would address the issues of some of the statements that you've made in the past. And I'd like to move on to another particular area of concern that I've got that we may very well find some agreement on. And that has to do with our Native Americans and the housing shortages on the reservations. I represent a state, South Dakota, that has 9 tribes, all of whom are sovereign and who have a lot of their land in what we call trust or treaty trust tribes. I'd like to draw your attention to a provision of the last omnibus funding bill that I championed that was streamlined HUD's Section 184 lending program. As I mentioned in our conversation, lending on tribal trust land is a rather difficult process, and the HUD 184 loans that are meant to provide mortgage credit where it is scarce can be delayed by a slow exchange of title information between the BIA and HUD. The provision that I led would allow HUD to issue the certificates of guarantee for a 184 loan without waiting for the BIA if the lender originating the loan agrees to indemnify HUD for any losses. This will significantly streamline the program, but HUD will still have to proactively work with the individual lenders and housing organizations that serve Native Americans in order for the Section 184 program to be successful. A lot of them are very local lenders, and they know how to handle a lot of the individuals that are there and the challenges they have on a personal basis in order to get that loan approved. But if confirmed, will you commit to work with me and our Native American stakeholders in South Dakota to making the HUD Section 184 lending program a success?
Thank you again, Senator, for meeting with me. Yes, you have my commitment to work with you. I have had the opportunity to reach out to a number of the Native American stakeholders. We've had conversations about some of the issues that you've addressed. And I know firsthand from having been on a reservation how difficult that situation is. I am wholly supportive of working with you to see what we can do to make things better.
Thank you. Dr. Rouse, I'd like to thank you also for your willingness to have a phone call with us and also for your willingness to serve. As I mentioned in our phone conversation, there have been significant economic disparities between states like South Dakota, where social distancing comes naturally, and larger, more populated states that have experienced a significant spread of COVID-19. I also understand that your role will involve providing counsel to the president on economic matters. How do you believe future COVID-19 assistance can be targeted for those who need it most, while being mindful of the fact that we're long into the territory of spending money that, well, basically we're going to be borrowing? And by that, I mean, I know that we talk about state and local governments, but the need and the demand varies a lot from state to state. And trying to target the assistance seems to be a really sensitive issue right now. Can you talk a little bit about how you're planning on balancing your recommendations to the president, recognizing that we still have needs, but also recognizing that every single dollar that we intend to offer is money that we'll be borrowing, and probably the next 2 generations will have to pay back?
Yes, Senator, thank you. And I appreciated our conversation yesterday. So if we take a step back and think about the purpose of the federal assistance right now, it's that we want to both provide assistance to people today while ensuring that our economy grows so that future generations are better off. So I do ask on us more is to get us to the other side of this pandemic. And that will ensure that our economy.
Dr. Rouse, I apologize. You're cutting out. And so what I would do with the permission of the chair is I'll put this in as a question for the record. And I'll just simply ask if you could get back with me on that particular one. Thank you, Dr. Rouse. Let me move back to Congresswoman Fudge for just a second. We did not have the opportunity to address this in our conversation yesterday. But one of the major outstanding issues from the 2008 financial crisis is housing finance reform. HUD doesn't have a primary jurisdiction over this matter, but nonetheless, your work on housing will be important in deciding what to do with the GSEs. Are there any thoughts you'd like to share with us as to what should happen with Fannie and Freddie, or what an exit from conservatorship should look like?
Thank you, Senator. You know, the one thing I would say is that one of the things that we have not done as a nation is have a holistic approach to housing. At some point, we need to have a collaborative discussion between FHA, between FHFA, Treasury, HUD. And I would say that this is such a huge issue and has such big implications for the market. We're talking about a $5 trillion business. I believe that just as Congress has chartered these GSEs, it is Congress's ultimate decision as to how they should be handled. I believe that that this is such a big issue that Congress should make that decision.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you on that issue in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to start by thanking both Congresswoman Fudge and Cecilia Rouse for being here today. I appreciate your willingness to serve. I just want to spin off of Senator Rounds' last point, and that is, and it's a point you made, Congresswoman Fudge. There are so many times in government. I mean, we were just talking about broadband yesterday. There's 4 or 5 agencies that deal with broadband. You just talked about the number of agencies that are dealing with housing. You know very well, being a congressperson, that Congress isn't really renowned for getting things done. That's why we have the number of executive orders that's gone out over the last few administrations. And I would appreciate, I think you're right, Congress does need to act. But in the meantime, I would appreciate if you can do what you can do to break down the silos in the housing arena in particular, because I think that's one of the boat anchors on our economy. And in that regard, I wanted to visit with you a little bit about, in your position at HUD, what will you do to support affordable workforce housing and rehabilitation?
Thank you very much, and thank you for our visit. Certainly, HUD's mission is to provide housing, low income and affordable housing. So I support that mission by saying that we need to expand, as we talked about, expand housing choice vouchers. It is something that we must do. We need to find resources to assist with paying rents, with down payments. We all know that when we come out of this crisis, whenever that is, people are not going to just be able to say, you know, I'm 14 months behind in rent and I can just pay it all back right now. We know that is not going to happen. And so we have to come up with a cohesive policy to allow people to know that the government is going to be assisting them. And we have many ways to do it. I mean, certainly FHA comes within the control under the jurisdiction, but the others don't. But I, again, believe that the only way that we solve any of these problems is to do it through interagencies, to talk about what that policy should be. And that is the only way we solve these issues, is to come together and agree.
Okay, also spinning off of, thank you, also spinning off of Senator Round's comment on Indian country, I would hope that you have somebody in HUD, if you're confirmed, have somebody in HUD that is able to deal with the myriad of programs that impact Indian housing, because it's incredibly deficient. Senator Booker was on earlier today, and we have a conversation about poverty in inner cities and poverty with large land-based Indian tribes. They're both significant problems, and I hope that you have somebody in your agency that's willing to work with the BI to make sure that we get some housing built in Indian country, because quite frankly, it is massively deficient. You don't need to respond to that. Just do that, if you could, if you're confirmed. I have, my last question is for Cecilia Rouse. Cecilia, and I should have said this, was Congressman Fudge. Thank you for meeting with us. I appreciate the conversation we have. We're in the middle of a pandemic, which has caused the economy to go into recession, depression, some will say. Depends on what area of business you're in. I want to know your perspective, as we're talking about borrowed money, and it's been talked about a lot, and it's certainly a concern to me. but I want to know your perspective on how we spend money right now, especially if it's borrowed, to move, as you said, to move the country out of a potential decline into economic growth again.
Thank you, Senator. And I apologize for my connection. I'm trying with an earpiece now. So I do believe that the best way for us to get back on solid economic footing is by getting through this pandemic. And that means supporting households, supporting businesses, especially small businesses, supporting our state and local governments. If we don't, we run the risk of actually finding ourselves in a downward spiral, because the capacity to deal with our debt is not only the amount that we spend, but the size of our economy. And if we want to keep our economy going, we need to be spending some money. So I believe we have to be doing smart investments as we come out of this that have economic returns, such as those in investments, infrastructure, R&D, education, so that we, again, put our economy on a strong footing so that it is growing and there for future generations.
And I assume when you say smart investments, you're saying the monies that are appropriated by Congress need to be targeted.
They need to be targeted. They need to be smart. They need to be in those areas where we know that the economic benefit outweighs the cost.
Thank you both for your willingness to serve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Chairman Toomey and incoming Chairman Brown, and thanks to Congresswoman Rouse and Dean, excuse me, for being here. And congratulations to your family, Congresswoman. I love seeing my mom in the background. I'm glad yours is there too. Real quick question for you, Congresswoman. Congresswoman Fudge, I should say. Do you recognize the backlog of the pending HUD code changes passed by the Manufactured Housing's Consensus Committee? Do you recognize those as things that need to be fixed?
Yes, sir, I do.
And on a related note, Congresswoman, I remember when I was Speaker of the House down in North Carolina, I met with a town that was in my district, and it was on affordable housing, which I supported significantly in North Carolina. About 45 minutes went on things that we could do to produce affordable housing. Then they requested that I support a bill that would mandate a sprinkler in single-family housing for fire suppressant, which for a $100,000 home would increase the cost of the home by about $15,000. It really made me start thinking about barriers to affordable housing that could potentially be an overreach in certain communities. I had this discussion with Dr. Carson about, when we have to prioritize limited funds for affordable housing, what are your thoughts on potentially looking at jurisdictions that have a need for affordable housing but may have overreached on the barriers to that purely through regulatory overreach? As a means for kind of prioritizing where we put these limited dollars to address affordable housing problems.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I think everything is on the table. I mean, we have to look at regulations. We also have to look at safety. We have to be sure that if we want to put people in housing, we have to do it in the most efficient, effective, and safe way. So I believe all of those things are on the table and would be something that I'd be happy to discuss with you and take a good look at.
Well, thank you. If confirmed, I'd like to talk about things that we absolutely have to regulate to make sure that people have a safe home. But maybe you let the regulatory burden in certain jurisdictions be instructive towards grants and other things that they may be eligible for. So again, Congresswoman Rouse, Congresswoman Fudge and family, congratulations on your nomination. And Congresswoman, thank you for your service, long-time service to your community. Dean Rouse, I've got a question. Before COVID hit, we had an economy that I think by most measures was moving in the right direction. And I believe that a part of that were some of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, not all of it. There are other factors, but were a significant contributing factor to the economic growth. We understand that President Biden is going to propose tax increases, and particularly corporate tax increases. What is your position on how we move forward and best position our economy to grow as we continue to make progress on the vaccine and reopen the economy? Do you think an increase in corporate taxes is called for?
Senator Tillis, thank you for that question, that you've really landed on an important question, which is that we understand that now, in order to get to the other side of the pandemic, the federal government needs to step in. But as we get to the other side and get back on the path for economic growth, I think it is important that we look at the federal budget in totality and think about the important investments that we need to make in order to improve economic growth, but also understand how are we going to pay for those investments now. And so I believe we should be taking a comprehensive look at that. The president has committed and saying that he wants to look at an array of tax options, but that he believes that individuals and corporations should pay their fair share. So this is not to say that there's just an automatic repeal of the tax credits that were passed before, but we need to look at the most important ways that we can both raise revenue in the most economically efficient way possible, but that ensuring that everybody is paying their fair share.
Thank you. Well, I'll be submitting questions for the record to both of you. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations on your nominations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and incoming Chair Brown. Congratulations to both the nominees. I've enjoyed our conversations together. I'm going to direct most of my comments this morning to Dr. Rouse, but as Congresswoman Fudge knows, particularly on housing finance reform, this is an issue that is extraordinarily important to me, and I look forward to revisiting it with you once you're confirmed. Dr. Rouse, one of the things that came out of the first CARES package that I think was extraordinarily significant long term was that when we did the expansion of unemployment, there were two component parts, as we all know. One part, the $600 a week plus up, which is relatively controversial. The other part that I think there was broad-based support for was the expansion to cover self-employed, gig workers, independent contractors, a whole host of folks. As we've discussed, that universe of workers and that type of work is not going away. I think it's terribly important that we have a social contract that includes all forms of work. I hope there will be a further expansion of benefits to those workers and including a component of portability, something that I've worked with members on the committee on for a long time. But can you speak to how we continue, sticking with unemployment to start, how we continue this commitment to unemployment in this expanded basis? Obviously, it was continued in the December COVID package. I was proud of that. But at some point, it can't be an entirely federal government obligation. We've got to have those payors kicking in as well. But can you speak to your goals on how we make sure unemployment covers all forms of work?
Senator, I share your interest and commitment to this issue. And in fact, I will say it's part of what draws me to this potential opportunity. And I think it is part of the better part of Build Back Better. And that is to recognize that much of our social contract, as you describe it, was designed in the 1930s. It was designed for a labor contract or a relationship between workers and their employers that is very different than what we have today. So if we take our UI system, for example, today the system is not providing the kind of safety net that it used to do. Many workers are not covered. I think it's less than half of workers are actually covered. The replacement rate has been falling. It was designed for short-term unemployment spells, and what we're observing in our most recent recessions is that unemployment spells are becoming longer, and our UI system was not designed to help there. And yet we know that for both to help workers get through and for economic stability, UI plays an important part of that role. So I share your view. I look forward to working with you and others. I think that broadening the base of workers that are covered is important, whether that's through portable benefits, whether that's for how we classify workers. There are many options that are on the table. And if confirmed, I would want to work with my team and with all of you to find ways to what I will call modernize our UI system and modernize other parts of our safety net so that it reflects and honors the changing nature of work in our economy.
Well, thank you. Let me quickly get in my next question, which is we want to make sure this economic recovery is equitable. Again, I think we took a major step forward, and want to thank so many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, particularly my folks like Tim Scott and Mike Crapo, when we included the Jobs and Neighborhood Investment Act in the last COVID package, which puts $12 billion into CDFIs and MDIs. Senator Brown's been a big advocate of this, Congressman Fudge on the House side, making sure there was equitable access to capital. We've got to make sure we implement that program right, because we clearly saw Black and brown businesses get disproportionately hurt by COVID, and implementing that program is going to correctly is going to be really important. Another component is the fact that, in the Great Recession, we saw 3/4 of the jobs that were lost were jobs that only required a high school education. Coming forward, we're seeing that 3/4 of the jobs that are being created require a college-based education. We can attack that at the student debt level, but we can also attack it on incentives to have businesses start investing in human capital. You and I have talked about the idea of changing our tax and accounting treatment of businesses that invest in human capital. And you may want to take this for the record, because my question, I've used up all my time, and I won't ask you to give a full launch there. I think John Kennedy's waiting anxiously, but I hope I know we've talked about this before, but I hope we can really continue this conversation on an equitable economic recovery.
We'd be happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Warner, for respecting the clock. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay. First, it's an honor to meet you. I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but it's important to me personally to clear up the confusion that I have from your answer to one of Chairman Toomey's questions. I think it is accurate that you did say at one point that Republicans don't care about people of color even a little bit. And I'd like to know if you truly believe that.
Senator, thank you. I also said that if they do, I'd be happy to listen. And I am certainly always willing to listen to not only my constituents, but my colleagues. And I would suggest to you very, very strongly that there has never been a time in my entire public service career that I have not supported and worked with all people. And I commit to you, I will do just that if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed for this position.
Yes, ma'am. But I again, not to put too fine a point on this, but I need a little more precise answer. So let me ask it a little more directly. Do you think Republicans care about people of color?
I do, some, yes.
Do you think most Republicans care about people of color?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
Dean, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. It's an honor to meet you too. I want to take you back to the month before the pandemic started, before we even knew about the coronavirus. What tax changes, if any, would you have made at that point in time, given the fact that we know taxes impact the economy? If generally speaking, if you tax something, you get less of it.
Senator, I believe what you're referring to is the fact that before the pandemic struck, or we identified the virus, the economy overall was doing relatively well. We were in an expansion. Unemployment rates were low.
Right. But I'm running out of time.
What
tax changes at that point would you have made to the economy?
So Senator, if you will, one of the problems though with our economy at that time is we still had inequality that was at, I would say, record levels, except for the fact that it's been exacerbated now.
Yes,
so I still
what tax changes would you, I'm sorry, I have to do this because I only got a minute and 30 seconds. What tax changes at that time would you have made to the economy?
So, Senator, I would have been looking for ways and strategies for us to be addressing income inequality and wealth inequality, which existed at that time pre-pandemic.
How would you have done that?
Well, I'm an economist and I study things. I would want to look at a broad array of potential options. And if when President Biden is ready to consider the options for paying for his investments, which we know will help improve and grow the economy, we will study and try to impose taxes in the most efficient way. But where individuals or corporations are paying their fair share.
Sorry for interrupting. I hate doing that, but we are limited by time. What are the options that you're talking about?
So we can look at our income tax rates. We can look at our corporate tax rate. We can look at ways to deal with wealth income tax.
Capital gains? Is capital gains on your list?
So capital gains are tricky because we know that the way that we currently treat capital gains is also generate some inefficiencies. And so there's tricky ways that we can deal with capital gains, but I think that we should look at all of the options. Absolutely, because we have wealth inequality in this country, which is wide and getting wider.
In my last 9 seconds, how about the death tax?
So, Senator, I believe that we should be studying and considering all of these different options and to put together a portfolio which is most effective for addressing wealth and income inequality in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And congratulations to both of you on your nominations. Thank you for being here with us. We live in an America today where a typical white family has 8 times the wealth of a typical Black family and 5 times the wealth of a typical Latinx family. Gaps that haven't budged in decades. Now, Dr. Rouse, you have done important research on racial and economic equity throughout your career. Could you tell us what it would mean for American families and for our economy if we pursued policies that closed the racial wealth gap substantially?
Senator Warren, I think we share a concern about the increasing wealth gap. And I think if we step back and first consider why wealth is important and why the racial wealth gap or any wealth gap is important. First, that wealth represents a cumulative impact of inherited resources, right? It's income over one's lifetime and expenses incurred. It's a reflection of family circumstances. It can be luck, but it also reflects obstacles in the labor and financial markets. And so the Black-white wealth gap in particular can be attributed to a history of discriminatory policies such as redlining. And importantly, this legacy continues to replicate itself generation to generation, as those without accumulated wealth cannot pass it on to their children. The second part of why I believe it's important is that these differences are consequential. So wealth is protective and is important for well-being. So increased wealth has been associated with better health outcomes and better financial resilience. And during this pandemic, what we've seen is that those with greater wealth had more resources to fall upon when the economy slowed. So it provides a kind of self-insurance against economic adversity. It also provides access to housing in safe neighborhoods with good schools, which confers additional advantages on those who can afford such opportunities. And so closing the wealth gap is not about trying to literally take away, but is trying to ensure that everybody can participate in this economy.
Yeah, well, that's powerfully important. Thank you. And you know, one big contributor to the wealth gap is student loan debt. Black and Latinx students borrow more money to go to college and they have a harder time paying it off. If the president canceled up to $50,000 in student loan debt, as Leader Schumer and I have called for, it would close the racial wealth gap among people with student loan debt by about 25 points. Canceling $50,000 in federal student loan debt is the single biggest thing the administration could do on its own to narrow the racial wealth gap. So I hope we'll get a chance to work together to make this happen. I want to turn to another piece of the racial wealth gap, and that is home ownership. Owning a home is the #1 way that middle-class families build wealth. But here's the ugly truth. the racial homeownership gap is now wider than it was when Congress outlawed housing discrimination back in the mid-1960s. And this difference can be traced directly to decades of racist federal policies, including redlining that denied Black families the same path to homeownership that was available to white families. Since the government created this problem, it seems only right that the government should help fix it. So, Congresswoman Fudge, you've spent your career working to improve the lives of people in communities of color. If the federal government provided help with down payment for families living in formerly redline neighborhoods, would that make a difference in narrowing the racial homeownership gap and the racial wealth gap?
Thank you very much, Senator. It would make a huge difference because that is the biggest impediment to home ownership for communities of color, is the down payment. We meet all of the other qualifications. And so it's like us being in a race with people who've already had a head start, because we don't have a mother or father to give us a down payment. We don't have the wherewithal, the same kind of income, the same kind of access. And so it is like we are starting out of the blocks with somebody who was out ahead of us by 100 yards. Down payment assistance is a major impediment. And if we can fix that, you would see a tremendous growth, because no matter what they say, home ownership amongst Blacks right now is the same as it was in 1968.
Yep. So thank you, Congresswoman. You're very powerful on this. We need to take action before the pandemic widens the homeownership gap even more. You know, it's time for an all-hands-on-deck approach to tackling the shameful racial disparities in our economy. Providing down payment assistance is one powerful way to do that. Administratively canceling billions of dollars of student loan debt is another. I know you both care deeply about these issues, and I'm looking forward to working with you in your new roles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you to our nominees. I want to start with Congresswoman Fudge. We had a great conversation the other day, and I wanted to follow up on something I feel very passionately about. A straight line can be drawn from the racist local, state, and federal segregation policies of the past to our zoning codes today. And so in addition to recommending recommitting to fair housing enforcement, what should HUD do to encourage communities to abandon exclusionary zoning and implement policies that build accessible, equitable, and affordable housing?
Well, thank you, Senator, and I did very much enjoy our conversation. We have to get rid of this notion of not in my backyard. We're going to have to find ways for two reasons. One is housing has increased by 10% or more a year. And the average person that we're talking about that HUD serves are people who are not, their incomes are not rising at that level. So we're going to have to find some incentives for home builders, especially those that build multifamily housing, to assist us in these communities to change the zoning laws. I mean, some of these are very, very discriminatory, and I think that there are some legal options, but I also think we need to convince them that it is to their advantage economically. It is to their advantage to make sure that their communities know that it is important to them to get people off the street and to house people properly in safe, affordable neighborhoods. Zoning is a tough issue. Being a mayor, I understand it. But it is an educational issue, and we need to make sure that we educate them on what they are doing to their communities.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to working with you on this. And I'll just add that part of this is the politics of cities and towns, and people who otherwise consider themselves rather progressive get rather regressive and are not reminded by people such as you and many of the people on the Banking Committee and in the Congress that the exclusionary zoning, restrictive covenants, all of that is the great-grandson of Jim Crow. And we need to remember that legacy, even as all of these progressives were fighting for progressive causes, except for housing next to their block. And that's something that we have to wrap our minds around, not just from a policy perspective, but from a community and communications perspective. And I'm hoping that we can work together on that.
So if I'm confirmed, I will be talking with you about it all the time, Senator.
Great. Last Congress, I introduced a CDBG-DR reform bill that would permanently authorize the program and get funding to communities faster to help communities develop housing-focused community resilience plans. Do you support the permanent authorization of CDBG-DR?
Yes, very, very much. And I will be happy, if confirmed, to work with you on it. That's the only way we can get it out without jumping through a million hoops.
Thank you very much. And Hawaii has one of the worst housing shortages in the United States. We have San Francisco, New York prices and Midwestern salaries. And so do I have your commitment to work, generally speaking, on the housing shortage in Hawaii and specifically on the Native Hawaiian housing challenge and the Native Hawaiian housing block grant?
Very much. I'm looking forward to working with you.
Okay, and Dr. Rouse, there's a real sort of shift in thinking around the economics of climate action. And I think that this thinking is happening in academia. It's certainly happening in markets, as we see, and it's happening in the Congress. And I'm wondering how you see your role in developing the data sets that sort of flesh out the case that climate action is not just not in conflict with an economic strategy, but it is in fact our economic strategy. And I'm wondering how you're going to develop the data sets to clarify that so we don't have to have this sort of 1970s argument about whether we're going to protect the environment or develop the economy.
Senator, I can assure you that the addressing our climate challenge is front and center of the administration's agenda and of the CEA. First and foremost, we will have an economist, one of our members, and we're hiring another economist, should I be confirmed at least, that will focus on climate and understanding the true costs of climate inaction, understanding the benefits of addressing climate and how we can do so efficiently are key to what I'd like to accomplish at the CEA, should I be confirmed.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Congratulations on the nominations, both to you, Congresswoman Fudge and Dr. Rouse. Dr. Rouse, let me start with you, and I appreciate both of you having conversations with me. But Dr. Rouse, let me start with you, and as you can imagine, it's surrounding the hospitality industry and tourism industry because Nevada has been so hard hit. Our resort operators support our whole community, but as you and I discussed, when people are unwilling to travel during a pandemic, it has a devastating impact on our economy, both on the businesses and the workers that directly and indirectly support it. And let me just throw out some numbers here because I think this is important for us to understand. Before the pandemic, the travel and tourism industry was one of the largest sectors of the economy. In 2019, travel generated $1.1 trillion in spending and supported 15.8 million American jobs. But we know because of the COVID pandemic, it has devastated this industry. And according to Oxford Economics, the U.S. lost $510 billion in travel spending and 4.5 million travel jobs in 2020. So my question to you is, do you think that the industry, the hospitality, the travel, leisure industry is one area where Congress and the administration should focus when crafting a stimulus bill?
Senator, I appreciated our conversation and I share your concern about the travel and leisure industries. We know from the most recent job report that that is an area where we're seeing our most significant job losses and where they have been hardest hit by this pandemic. And as I have said before, getting through this pandemic where as safely as possible, where we're helping individuals, helping the businesses that are viable get to the other side so that they can participate in the growth is very important. And I believe we should be targeting our assistance at those hardest hit areas. I believe the president shares that priority. I would say that in the rescue plan, right, there is additional aid for businesses, but I would look forward to talking with you and understanding what, from your perspective and your constituents' perspective, would be the most effective ways to ensure that we get the assistance to those businesses and those sectors that are the most heavily impacted by the pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Rouse, because I do look forward to working with you. Senator Kramer and I both introduced this bipartisan bill, the Hospitality and Commerce Job Recovery Act. And we have ideas after working with our industry locally and nationally about what can be done. That includes tax credits to be effective tools to incentivize spending and help certain sectors recover from an economic crisis. So I look forward to talking with you on that subject. Thank you. Congresswoman Fudge, let me associate myself with some of the comments that Senator Scott brought forward with respect to manufactured housing. He and I both co-chaired a bill, the Manufactured Housing Modernization Act. It was passed into law. It was passed into law a year ago, and to my understanding, has still not been implemented by HUD. As a result of that, he and I sent a letter to then Secretary Carson, February 4th, asking for the quick implementation of the new law. And really what it does is it issues guidance for the inclusion of manufactured housing in states and local governments' consolidated plans. So I would look forward to working with you in the implementation of that particular law. But I only have so much time. Let me talk about one other area that we all have been addressing, which is the affordable housing crisis in Nevada, across the country. It is so prevalent. One area, though, is youth homelessness. Nevada's third in the nation for the total number of unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness, and the highest rate of unsheltered, unaccompanied homeless youth. So, and I know this is an area that is important for you as well. What ideas do you have to work with other agencies to reduce the youth homelessness, and what can HUD be doing as well?
Thank you very much, Senator. And I did enjoy a conversation. Thank you. Certainly, if I'm confirmed, one of the things that we need to address right away is youth who are aging out of the foster care system. As soon as they age out, they have no place to go. So HUD has to start to put in place programs to allow them to stay in public housing, at least until we can get them on their feet. But right now, it is a very difficult situation with the numbers of young people who are, as you say, unattended, but the majority of them are foster children. So we need a program for foster youth, and it's something that I would be happy to work with you on, should I be confirmed.
I look forward to it. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Smith.
Well, thank you so much, Chair Toomey and Chair-to-be Brown, and welcome to our nominees. You both bring such distinguished records and I know a true spirit of public service. So I'm really grateful for the conversations that I was able to have with both of you over the last couple of weeks, and I very much look forward to supporting you. You know, we are in the midst of the worst public health crisis and economic crisis together colliding in our country that we have, in my knowledge, ever lived through. But I really appreciate how both of you are talking about how we need to navigate through this crisis, but also focus on how we can expand on the ingenuity and the innovation and the amazing work of American workers to be able to build our economy forward. I want to just, Dr. Rouse, I want to start with you. I really appreciated our conversation and your thoughtfulness and your reasonableness, and I appreciate especially how you talk about following the data, not just the averages, but the entire scope of data that will help us understand how people are doing at the extremes of our economy, as well as how people on the average are doing. And this gets to a question that Senator Warren was raising that I think is so important. It is the cost of inequality to our economy. And Elizabeth touched on this with regard to home ownership, but I want to ask you about the challenges to our economy because of lack of access to capital for communities of color, Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, and especially the role that CDFIs and native CDFIs can play in expanding access to capital, the impact that can have on inequality and getting our economy really moving again.
Thank you, Senator. You're raising a very important issue as we think about having a shared recovery and bringing, ensuring that it's not just the average that does well, but everywhere, and the diversity. It's not. I want to just emphasize that geographic diversity and what happens in our rural areas in particular, and for our hardest hit areas, is an important part of that mosaic. And we know that stimulating economic activity is the best way to generate employment for rural areas. And therefore economic security and livelihood, and to ensure that the young people want to stay in those areas, not that people have to be forced to stay where they don't want to stay, but that they have an incentive to stay and not to flee to urban areas in order to find a job. So if we want to bring back vibrancy to all of the areas of the U.S., we have to ensure that the businesses and the smaller businesses have access to capital so they can get started. And importantly, during a downturn such as this, that they have access to capital so they can thrive during an economic activity and bridge to make sure that they ensure and they survive to the other side. So I believe this is an important part of our strategy.
I appreciate that. And when you and I met, we talked about what this could look like in Indian country in the United States. And I want to re-extend my invitation to have you come to Minnesota, either virtually or in person, so that we can have some conversations about what that would mean in terms of access to capital and economic development in tribal lands. And let me turn to Representative Fudge just to carry on this theme. I so appreciate you and your leadership. And I also just want to note that as a mayor, I think that mayors know a little bit about mayors. No problem is too big or too small for a mayor to focus on. And also, most problems when you're a mayor are not Republican or Democratic problems. They're problems about whether people's lives work or not. I believe that you'll bring that same spirit to housing and urban development. So I want to thank you. And I want to follow up specifically on a conversation that you and I also had about the shortage of housing on tribal lands. And would ask if you could just comment briefly on NowThis, which is the most important housing program for tribal and tribal land, Indian country, and what role you see that can play in addressing the housing shortage in tribal communities.
Well, thank you very, very much, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me. NowThis is something that was brought up to me by most of the Native American stakeholders that I've already spoken with. It's something that I have guaranteed them that I am going to look into as quickly as possible. And as soon as I can, if I'm confirmed, as soon as I can get in the office and talk to the staff and figure out what's going on with it, I promise that I'll get back with you, as well as I promised them that I'd get back with them, and I intend to do just that.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, I have a question for the record, which I will submit for Representative Fudge about the importance of maintenance and safety needs in public housing. This relates to the tragedy that happened in Minnesota with terrible fire and the lack of sprinkler systems. You can get back to me on that, Representative Fudge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith. It's my understanding that Senator Van Hollen may be attempting to log on, but he has not been able to do so yet. Senator Brown, if you had a closing comment you wanted to make, maybe you could make that statement now, and we could give a little bit more time for Senator Van Hollen to join us in case he's able to do so.
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to my friend Congresswoman Fudge and Dr. Rouse. Thank you. Let me say in response to the questions from a number of my colleagues, it's pretty tough to take to Congresswoman Fudge. It's pretty tough to take a lecture on political speech from members of a party whose leader just 3 weeks ago literally incited a violent insurrection with his words. The real rhetoric we should be worried about are the lies and the conspiracy theories that do more than hurt feelings. They incite violence, they undermine our democracy. I know Senator Toomey at least has pushed back against the former president's dangerous lies about our election. I appreciate his candor and his courage. I wish others of our colleagues on this committee and in the Senate would show the same kind of courage. Thanks to Congresswoman Fudge. Thanks to Dean Rouse, Dr. Rouse, for your thoughtful answers. I'm excited to work with you. This committee made me even more excited about assuming the chairmanship. This hearing today made me even more excited about assuming the chairmanship of this committee. I appreciated Congresswoman Fudge's comments that these are extraordinary times that require extraordinary action. What you two will do in the next several years will be I would assume will be the most important things you've ever done in your lives. I consider my job to be that in the few years ahead. Your service to our country is both admirable and absolutely crucial. So thank you, Chairman Toomey, and thanks to our two witnesses.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Let me just briefly observe, I appreciate the conversation today. I'm grateful to the two witnesses for their willingness to serve our country. I will say I think I heard bipartisan discussion about the fact that we are in a different place in our economy today than we were back in March. And today, we've got people who are certainly suffering from very terrible circumstances, but it is a much more targeted group of folks than the sort of universal catastrophe we faced in March. And so I hope that as we develop further responses, it will reflect that reality. So this concludes the question and answer portion of today's hearing. Prior to adjourning, I do have some final housekeeping announcements. Before I do that, again, let me thank both of our witnesses, our nominees, for your testimony and for your willingness to serve. For senators, all follow-on questions for the record must be submitted by 5 p.m. Saturday, January 30th. That is 5 p.m. Saturday, January 30th. And for our witnesses, I do ask you to respond to written questions that you receive by noon Monday, February the 1st. I know that is a very tight time frame, but your prompt responses will facilitate this committee quickly processing your nominations. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.